Welcome to Cultivate the Ordinary podcast, curious conversations for the anxious, frustrated, and bored. I'm Travis.
And I'm Jessie. So often we're held captive by screens, schedules, and media that's mind-numbing and polarizing. This leaves us seeing dimly through a fog. We want to spark more imagination and a better awareness of God's presence in the everyday.
Join us on a fun journey of discovery and curiosity as we look at the ordinary through the lenses of joy, wonder, beauty, and hope.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. I am so excited to have our very good friend Christa Hardin on today to talk about boundaries and relationships, how they bring you closer in marriage and how they protect you in different ways. Last time she talked to us about the mountain analogy, so be sure to check that episode out. Christa has worked with couples for nearly 20 years. She's a marriage researcher for Truity, an author, an Enneagram coach trainer, and a relationship coach herself. As a couples helper, she specializes in providing care for relationships and marriages. She believes in using a combination of general relationship techniques and the Enneagram assessment to provide nuanced care for her clients. She has a thriving Instagram community and a podcast following with over 1 million downloads, and that is how we met her, actually, through that podcast and through her certification. And her fairly new book, The Enneagram and Marriage, Your Guide to a Thriving Together in Your Unique Pairing. It was released in October 2023, and it's been well received and achieved bestseller status on both Amazon and Baker House Books.
Oh man, so welcome all the Christa Hardin fans that have came over to Cultivate the Ordinary today. But yeah, we're just really so fun to have Christa on, and as you said, Jess, personally, we both took her Enneagram and marriage course, and then of course listened to the podcast, and then getting coaching ourselves, and really just kind of getting her insights and perspective has really been helpful for us. And then one of our highlights at the close of the year was we got to meet Christa and Wes in Florida, and it was so fun just hanging out.
Guys, thank you so much for having me back. This has been a blast, and I have loved every minute with you guys. So I loved meeting with you too in person. It was such a joy, as did my husband, Wes. He was like, these guys are such good friends. I can't believe how well we get along. You both knew some of the same Christian philosophers, Travis,
man. Me and
Jess.
Wes had a blast.
Yes, you did. Jess and I do, and he also loves Jess. So it is just a great gift to have you guys doing this beautiful podcast. I have loved listening to it.
Kind of getting into this podcast episode today where we talk about boundaries and relationships. As you said, just the last time, in the previous episode, we talked, Christa gave us a really good, helpful tool and analogy around the mountain when it comes to relationships. So can you help us revisit that as we look at desires and instincts and the sequence of those types of things?
To recap, I really just am passionate for couples to understand that sometimes we're at the foothills of relationship woes, and we might even feel like we're in the darkness. Especially it hurts if we're already familiar with what the mountain peaks look like, and we've climbed together, maybe physically also and relationally, doing some great or gorgeous honeymoon kind of hikes, and then we find ourselves in the deserts or the falling rock zones. And so we really do need to learn how to come back to practical care in some seasons of marriage, and also to come back up to realize, how do we come back to intimacy versus isolating ourselves? How do we come back to generativity versus stagnation, or integrity versus despair? And these are the important life stages we have to climb. So as we were getting off last time after we stopped recording, we said a reminder is, for us to pull each other up as couples, because we will have one falling down sometimes, and we'll have to wait for each other versus being on two separate mountains. So that's just a bit of the analogy of the mountain and finding the ways we shine together.
Okay, thank you so much for bringing us back into that. I know a lot of the stuff we talk about on our podcast is like, soul care and rest and, identifying needs and things like that. We know that Christ did not constantly pour out in his ministry, in his life, and we want to follow that same example. He often went away to be alone in beautiful places like gardens and mountains to be with the Father. And so I just was curious as we kind of, move into this discussion today, what is one of your favorite kind of soul care places, if you're kind of stepping back from your work, your family, and to kind of take care of your soul?
Hmm. Well, I love to go for walks in the woods by myself, but in a safe moment in the daytime, with provisions. Sometimes my daughter will actually join me, but she's a type 4 on the Enneagram for those who know that system, and she likes to meander and go a little slow, but she also
Mm.
likes to make sure that we're both okay. So she'll stay near me, but not with me. And it's just a great time for each of us to seek wonder and creativity, but also to have some support as females in the world. So that's been a really powerful place for me to meet with God, is in the woods. And then also sometimes just being practical to say going into the word in the early morning or late night hours has been just a gift to me. And on the Bible app, there's a beautiful, it even has accompanying music meditation every day for you to just take some time with, just a little guided meditation. It's about 4 to 6 minutes. And that's been another just sweet and quick place, but very deep place to meet with God. Instead of what, of course, ideally it would be like an hour or more, but sometimes it's just a few minutes.
Yeah.
Mm, yeah. And that certainly does like help you cultivate what it is you're going to do throughout the rest of your day,
Yeah.
So needed, so needed. And in this culture, it's like people don't value the the breaks, the slowing down, something that is just
Mm,
um, for yourself.
yeah.
Mm.
Everyone wants to tell you that you just need to hit the ground running and go, go, go.
Doesn't work very well for long.
No, it does not. So
Yeah.
with that, we're talking about boundaries today. So
Yeah. So, I mean, you do a lot of work with the Enneagram as a tool in relationships, dealing with conflict. That's part of the human condition. What have you discovered around like personality differences and boundaries?
I was just thinking about that because when I start seeing any couple individuals as well, most people do not have good boundaries. They come to me because of that. They come to me because things are off and relationships are wonky, and particularly around the area of self-care, which I loved how Jess mentioned that Jesus often withdrew to lonely places. And I was just reading one of those Bible studies the other day on the Bible app, and it was reminding me as his life got more intense and accusations and stress built up, he did it even more. And
mhm,
so I think that that is something for us all to be mindful of, is that when we're in places of distress, we need boundaries even more so that we can have health to do what we've come to do. And to live out our purposes as best as we can so that we're refreshed, recharged, like you said, get that mindset right. Now we can come back into it. But that's just not where people start. And for a variety of reasons, mostly because within the culture we're in, it's a culture of achievement and, like you said, just going all the time. And then the very few people who do have really good self-care, often it's such active self-care that there's no rest or contemplative work. And so they're just going from one hedonic experience to the next without loving others.
mm, yeah,
Mm.
yeah. I definitely feel that. I know the differences in how people are wired to, you know, to kind of go deep into, just health and wellness, and even, taking care of all of those needs. But it's just it's such a needing to constantly still grind, even though it is self care. But yeah, the contemplative, we're very big on curiosity,
Mhm.
contemplation, and cultivation. Those are like three values that Travis and I have, and I use with my clients and things like that. Just so important. I wanted to share a quote by Brene Brown
Mhm.
about boundaries. She says boundaries are a prerequisite for compassion and empathy. We can't connect with someone unless we're clear about where we end and where they begin. If there's no autonomy between people, then there's no compassion or empathy. only like she was talking about, you can get enmeshed,
Mm.
which may not be a term that everybody knows what that means, but yeah, what do you think about that?
Well, I think that empaths are more likely to become enmeshed and to have fewer boundaries. And for those who are familiar with typing systems, like Myers-Briggs, you're going to see FJs kind of take on the feelings of others, or Enneagram heart types take on those feelings. Also, females have that tendency as a general rule. And so, of course, you might fall outside of that bell curve. But in general, like watching for that is important. If you happen to be somebody like that, where boundaries are very fluid and you're just taking even pride in helping, but forgetting that a lot of times when we stand in and don't speak up or set the boundary, we're actually enabling people. So I'm really glad you shared that Brene Brown quote. And of course, we know it could be very rigid on the other side, where we don't let anyone in and we just have walls up, and we have that because of some hurts, depending on the personality type. There's different reasons for that, but I think that these two spaces are much harder than they have to be if we can instead learn some healthy boundaries where we let people in appropriately.
Yeah, yeah. I know just in your and my conversations that boundaries has been a huge theme lately in terms of just what it looks like to actually come closer to your partner, and that they protect intimacy. They protect so many things. And
Mhm.
one author that you and I both have read her book is Julianne Taylor Shore. Her book on setting boundaries that stick. You had an episode with her on the podcast, and I listened to it like three times,
Mhm.
and just got her book, and so she really outlined, four types of boundaries that we all need to have, and I'm sure you have so many other people you have gleaned from in this area. But if there's anything you want to share about that or other authors and their concepts of boundaries we need to be aware of.
So good, Jess. I love that you drunk that up with her. She is amazing. And I am so, and so are you, but I just love that you're helping everybody to hear the ways that she really reflects on it. She talks about physical boundaries, psychological boundaries, executing boundaries with others, and containment. And by that, I mean, these are terms you don't have to remember each one, but she's really reminding us there are particulars where you might need a physical boundary. Yes, even from your spouse, sometimes, even if you're one flesh, you may need to say, I'm not feeling up for being with you tonight, but I'm hoping to catch up with you soon. You might need to set a psychological boundaries with extended family to say, you know what, you guys have well wishes for us, but we're trying to leave and cleave, and here are some appropriate ways we think we can help you, but not take on your stuff. And that can, I mean, it's uncomfortable to say, but also be within spouses where one might have depression and the other partner gets compassion fatigue and has to say, I can help you, but I'm going to need a break first. Or, I can only help so much. I'm also going to need some counseling tools myself. So there's that psychological boundary. And sometimes we also need the boundaries, like I said, of containment, where we take on that sense of noticing, even just allowing ourselves to see where we end and another begins, and reminding ourselves, like, physically, I'm going to ground my feet into the ground right now. I'm going to imagine myself in a safe place because I am feeling unsafe right now. And I'm going to take a 5-minute pause from this conflict and take some time to regulate. And then I would just say, she talks a lot about executing boundaries with others in general too, because as we know, people in giving spaces, often there's not that many. The harvest is plentiful, but the labors are few. So you might be somebody who's like, I love saying yes. I want to say yes to church, to family, to friends. But there will be consequences if you say yes to everybody, and you will not last. So if you want a longer term giving, you've got to execute all kinds of boundaries. But the good news is you still get to give if you do that well.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, thank you for outlining all of those things
Mhm.
and just all those helpful reminders. I know one of the things I've used in Travis and I's relationship already, just in the past few months since I read, that book and have been hearing more from you, is the idea of like this psychological boundary and like in your own mind, how you think
Mm,
about yourself versus your spouse in
mm,
conflict.
mm,
And I think two questions she shared was, when you say you're in a conflict, like me and Travis are fighting about something that happened earlier today.
That's
um,
just
Yeah, yeah.
fictional. This
do
is
we
never
have an
never
example?
happens, does it?
Oh, we get it.
So, you know, he makes a comment
Mhm.
that, I'm going, ouch, what does that mean? And maybe it wasn't even intended to be hurtful. Maybe it was just a comment. He was just making an observation, but I felt triggered by it.
Mhm.
And inside, I have this psychological boundary that could come to my aid and say, is what he just said about me?
Mhm.
And is it true?
Mhm.
And if it is both actually about me and
Mhm.
true, I should
Mhm.
consider it. At least that's my understanding of that tool.
Mhm. Mhm.
And but if he said something that's actually more about him, but I'm still taking offense to it, it's like I mean that's
Mhm.
him, this is me.
Mhm. Mhm.
And or maybe sometimes people say things that they just aren't true. They're more emotionally driven. We're both emotionally reactive
Mhm.
personality types. So, that happens a lot. And I do the same to him. Like I'll say things and he can use his psychological boundary to ask
Mhm.
himself, okay, I'm differentiating between you and me, and we are different and we
Mhm.
can be different and all that stuff. So that was
Mhm.
just super helpful.
Yeah, that is super helpful. I love how you named that for inside of a marriage and how that can look, that you're allowing your own psyche to be healthy when you remind yourself, this might not even be about me. Like you have a body type spouse for those who do know Enneagram, or just might be an instinct driven person yourself. If Travis is overstimulated by his environmental cues, that might be enough for him to feel overloaded. I just asked that yesterday of people in my collective membership group, and there was about four people with that sort of personality. And I said, if you get overwhelmed in your environment in the five senses, will you be able to talk with your spouse about something important? And they were like, absolutely not, So
Yeah.
like, yeah, it might not be about either of you and just your temperaments in that moment. So I love how you brought that up. Or like we said with the in-laws, it might be their work to do and it's not even yours. So you can protect your psyche. So it's so fascinating that yes, even within a marriage, sometimes we make it more about us than we need to.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, gosh, that's so true.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's so much, yeah, it's just
Mm.
so much a source of a lot of the contention is just that one part right there of just the,
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah. But so I have a lot of work, all of us do, but I have a lot of work in this regard and all of this. But what do you have, like, with your work with couples, do you have like an outline of boundaries you give to couples or any resources to help map a plan out that you can differentiate between each other's needs or tips
Mhm.
on doing this with kindness? It almost seems too like we could
Mhm.
clumsily do it and add more fuel to the
Mhm.
fire depending on, so
Hmm.
any,
Yeah, I hear that you're just reminding everybody, like if you have some structure that might help.
yep,
I really do like to give couples the recommendation to read our blog on boundaries, which we could perhaps put in the show notes, just
yep.
to, if they have a sense for their temperament, it's helpful to know what boundaries might be needed. And to see it in plain written text can be less offensive than if your spouse says, this is the kind of boundary you need. But I also really like to just ask couples a very important question, and that is really getting them to stop and think. If you're a listener, you could even pause us. What are your core values? And once you have landed on what those are, share them with your spouse so that they know and they will begin to respect your boundaries differently. Like, for instance, one of mine is freedom, and it's very important to me. And actually, Wes recently said that's one of his too. But he was rubbing up against it a couple years ago so big when he was trying to control something, and he didn't know he was going to get a wild reaction from me because I was like, that's a core, deep
Mhm.
value for me that can't be challenged. It's within me. And so once he found that out, he was able to respect my boundaries more. But if he didn't know that
Yeah,
value, he didn't know it existed.
right.
So sometimes you have to discern what are your values. I just had a client tell me this week, one of his is respect because he's this achiever personality who has had a lot of shame in his life. So he's been able to set some boundaries to say, that's a tone that I don't appreciate because I need respect in my life. It's a core tenant, or going to church is a
Mm.
core tenant with my kids. So finding these things out, and let's say they're opposing values, because that does happen too. You might then come into a diplomatic space of boundary setting where, oh, you like to go to church and you don't. So we're going to go sometimes, or I will go and you won't go.
Mm.
But we'll begin to respect that about each other. So I think that that's important for us to really not try to usurp and put our values atop of our spouse, but allow for boundary setting to take place once we learn who each other really are at the core and respect that.
Mm,
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You reminded me of like the Gottmans, you're a huge fan.
Mhm.
We've been learning more recently of John and Julie Gottman.
Hmm.
How, and this might be similar to the core values, but how they talk about share with your spouse, like what's the dream in what you're
Mm,
talking about.
mm, mm,
And I love that, being just really listening well and having a clear communication about what the values and the dreams are
mhm,
in the setting of the boundaries, in the trying to create your own,
mhm.
independence, but then still being unified in your family mission or your marriage mission and things like that. So,
Hmm.
Mhm. Yes, I love that. The dream within the conflict, or even just the dream within the value. And
mm,
then beginning to see that depth, is it makes us excited as spouses to help make our spouse's dream come true, because we're like, oh, I know why. You were hurt in this way. And so you would love to allow for your legacy and your meaning making in this marriage to be healthier than you got. And there's a lot of joy in helping others. So when our spouse can be vulnerable, like you said, Jess, that's really neat to take our marriage to the next level and set the boundaries that we need.
Right.
yeah.
And it just seems like at the heart of so many things are misunderstandings, assumptions, wrong. Like if we really could do better, all of us, to take the time to get more to like what's really going on and some of the deep inner sort of origin story or whatever that is, that, I think there'd be so much more compassion, like you said too, of, just understanding one another better. But
But that, again, I just reminder, and so many people need to be just reminded of that, the listening, take a
oh
deep
yeah.
breath, make sure you're in speaker listener, like active listening place
Mm,
when you're discussing those things,
I think it
because
was
without it,
the
gosh,
president the
mm,
president of Harvard or something says a line, grow antenna, not horns. Think about that a lot.
mm. Like
yeah,
that.
Yeah.
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 Oh, wow. Thank
Um, yeah. So what are some kind of healthy rhythms or practices within our marriages that account for individual and relationship boundaries?
I think it's important both spouses come into the baseline of wellness to say what makes you feel well. Like, let's learn your dietary issues. If maybe we find out you can't have gluten, and that's a big part of keeping your gut health. Or I find out that I need a tool for sleep apnea.
Mm,
I know my husband's probably going to have a small surgery this summer for sleep apnea, because he's discovered that's really important baseline treatment for him.
mm,
And so these kinds of workings out matter a lot. And then once we get to those kinds of boundaries, like what we each need for wellness, from our sleep to our eating to our fitness, now we can come into what are the ways that we need sexual chemistry boundaries, even within that range, to say, maybe I really feel like each week I need that at least 6 hours to connect with you on a quality level. That's something I need. That's a kind of a baseline number we use in marriage circles. Often it's 10 hours a week, but busy times call for even a little less. But without some structure of we're not going to do all the other things, we wouldn't even have time for a quick date or walk and talk or a quiet dinner once in a while. So these are some boundaries to protect in your marriage on a one-to-one level, as well as your sexual intimacy, to say, here's when I think would be good timing in general. If it happens extra, that sounds good too, but let's try to make some time for it, either certain weeks or just certain days. And then I would say, social boundaries, to know who's good to hang with. If people are really attractive to us, let's not hang with them one to one. Let's be open about our communication so that we don't have boundaries that we're now sharing with others emotionally that we're missing out on with each other, or we're not inviting other parties into our deepest space that we could be potentially attracted to.
mm.
And that's a very real piece that a lot of people leave out because they're like, we're Christians, but it's okay. Even if you are Christians, things happen. So it's healthy to have some social boundaries too with what you say yes to or who you say yes to.
Mhm.
Well, I love too because it takes me back to when we were living in St. Louis. We had a really, really awesome group, kind of community group, and just kind of a faith group of so many people were peers the same age and stuff. But I remember a couple that was really mentored us in some ways, but had kind of talked about like, yeah, they'd share with each other like who they're like if hey, so and so is attractive to me, I'm just letting you know. And I remember
Mhm.
hearing that and going, wow, we never hear these things like when, I don't know, it doesn't seem like in like marriage counseling before getting married or, it's like that's a really
Mhm.
interesting because it's like,
Yeah. Well, most
Mhm.
people I think would just feel ashamed to admit something like that, especially
Mhm.
to their spouse, like, oh, because they might get angry or,
right. What do
whatever.
you do with it, I
Um,
guess? The fear of
Mhm.
like, okay, now do I have to be like on the lookout for every, but
mhm.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
but it's more like you're being proactive to say, I'm just being honest. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, these
Mhm.
are interesting things to think about.
Yeah, I think that is really honest. And even, is this a person I could be attracted to,
Yeah.
versus maybe somebody else you're like, it's so far away from my frame of reference, it would never happen. So that's a more protected space to be like, yes, let's have fun together. But if it could be one, it doesn't mean you can't talk to them. It just means you probably won't have a private project with
Right.
them.
Yeah.
So I think that we still can say yes sometimes, but we just need to understand boundaries are there for a reason, because what we usually have with the number one marriage issue, let's just put it on the table, is affairs.
Mm.
So when we know that that's including the church,
Hmm.
um, that we have to at least address and say, how can we prevent? And it is usually that affairs begin with deep friendships,
Yeah.
Mhm.
one to one, that are secret, and that
Mm.
flirtation and vulnerability starts happening in. So
Mm.
these are important boundaries to know about so that you can watch yourself walking through that. And we've all seen it or felt it to some degree where we can see that line and the line is right there. And so you have to come back.
Yeah.
So those
Yeah.
are good ones. So thanks for acknowledging that. I'm so glad you had a mentor to walk you guys through that.
Mm.
Yeah, it was helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, we've
Mm.
definitely had a lot of amazing mentors along the way. So as we talk about boundaries, like it it has so much to do with safety, right? In terms of not physical safety, but in this psychological safety. And I was reading recently, there's research about having good boundaries puts you kind of in this very integrated state. So integrated meaning like all the parts of your brain working well together as they should.
Mm.
And some people talk about survival brain, like in fight or flight. And then when you have good boundaries, and I know where I begin and end, and Travis is over here, and we are separate.
Mhm.
It's like that sense of I can give authentically, but we're not, that enmeshment's not happening and stuff like that. So there's also with that integrated state, like there's a certain type of flexibility that comes in that safe place of having good boundaries. So I
Mhm.
didn't know if there's anything more you wanted to say about that, but I also wanted to ask, how do you see room for others in community playing into healthy boundary work?
So I love this question because we do need community so desperately. But once we have allowed ourselves to be, like Travis said, really realistic with who would not be the right, who would be the wrong person to work deeply with that we might be attracted to, now we have this freedom to work creatively in our giftings and to work with these healthy boundaries, but now also the awareness that we can use our gifts without causing our marriage harm. And in fact, some of it might be together, some of it might be apart. And then we can say, what did you do today? What did you learn today? How are you sharing in the world? And
Mm.
it's so beautiful to be able to now use our gifts once we know, oh, we're rested and we have our commitment to each other. We're flourishing as a couple. We're taking care of each other. And we're also able to know how to be socially healthy. Now we're aligned and we can step right into our purpose, our vision, our values, our giftings. So I think that will look different in in different seasons, as we talked about the last podcast. If we're up to our ears in diapers with kids, we might say, you know what, that means I get to journal for 30 minutes. Or in another season, it means I get to go make a video at my church. So it's knowing that, and if it's not your season yet, just continue to try a little bit at least to step into some creative fun, right, guys? You guys are so good about that.
Trying, yeah. Yep, yep. Um, so I'm really curious about as we kind of get to the final stretch here of boundaries and relationships. Jess and I are in a group with some other couples that we're meeting to kind of work on our marriages and be honest and vulnerable, have good food, hang out. But the intentionality behind it is, yeah, just to really be there for one another and be a safe place to sort of process hard things. And I found it's a really cool thing when you've got, just a few other couples, and honestly, it could be another couple, but just that are doing life with you to where everyone's kind of agreeing to say, hey, look, I'm going to share within what's comfortable with my spouse or whatever, but like some of our junk from the week, and we just want to unpack this. And I have a blinder, and we've had a big fight over this.
Mm-hmm.
Can you guys help us? And I mean, I'm telling you how cool it's been to see Jess and I come in on a night and like maybe share, and it's like we can barely talk to each other right now. We had a huge fight just you coming here. And then being able to
Yeah.
unpack that with people that are really listening and empathizing, or like me hearing from another female, like to
Yeah.
maybe like empathize with Jesse, and then I as a dude can hear a little bit definitely more compassionately of like, yeah, that was I was not great there, and vice versa. But then
Yeah.
also being able to move around and then do the same for them and all that kind of stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
with all of that being said, I mean, do you have some insights or thoughts around like how we can grow more vulnerably in groups in
Mm.
this kind of space?
But still also maintain good, healthy
Yeah,
boundaries too. Like, what's that
Yeah.
balance?
yeah.
Yeah, I think that really we have to remember that when we cross our own boundaries, we all suffer. That other party suffers, we suffer. So, really, really key and critical is to notice that you're sharing with couples where it truly is safe. And it doesn't have to be just a fair space that you're concerned with. It might be there's a particular hardship in another way where personalities don't mesh. So looking at that together takes compromise sometimes. Like this is a couple we both really can do this with, or this group, we've tested the waters. It is a great safe place to land. Then I think, couples who are in church or community spaces can really thrive and do what you guys are doing. But it is okay to move around a bit if you found a group does not meet that need, because not everyone is going to be socially attuned or have the
Right.
emotional intelligence to do that work. And you can fall flat on your face with your vulnerability and feel worse as a couple if you share and it's not
Yeah.
accepted. But I think that once you have found that, you guys are spot on, that it just helps so much, particularly in the recent years. We've all realized that females have this 4 week cycle, and that the week before the actual period hits has been really hard. And I've begun to be able to share that in my couples journeys with my couples more. And again, like Travis said, like hearing from another female who can validate that is very critical. That's just one example, but it's a
Hmm.
big one because
Yeah.
it was hidden for so long. And
Mhm.
guys were thinking, this is only me. I'm she's crazy. And it's
Uh-huh.
like, she no longer has her calm hormones. She no longer has her happy hormones. She's not crazy, but she needs attendance right now. She needs grace. And this is the sort of sad little caveat I'll say is what's kind of hard is that sometimes men will then chase a younger woman. And I'm now learning like, oh no, now you guys are just going to have this season for longer. Like she's definitely got it too.
Right.
And but you've got it now an extra 15 years. And so
This is
so it's
true.
just something, it just came to me. But anyway, just continue to nurture and grow. And like you said, talk to other couples. You're doing that beautifully. Talk to a mentor, to a coach. Have a safe place to land. And of course, guy to guy, you might have to be the one to facilitate that. Also, lastly, my husband isn't one to want to go super deep.
Hmm.
So he was sharing about how he went out and had an amazing trip with his friend out west not long ago. But he goes, he really likes to go deep. So he would try me. He goes, but I don't like to go that deep. So
But
just So I couldn't be like in that moment, like, grr, that's why I did tell him though, my dream within the conflict was that you would actually go and get this deep, insightful spiritual guru helping you. And you're telling me you didn't do that. He goes, no, I didn't do that.
Oh,
Also, he just needed to set that boundary with me, like, Christa, that's not who I am, but I'm doing really well after that visit.
yeah,
I
yeah.
love
And
that.
we all have different capacities to
Correct.
that kind of
Yeah.
depth. And as you were talking about like the groups and how moving around is okay, like if you're in a group and you're like, you know what, this just doesn't quite have the safety that I need
Yeah.
to be able to open up and share like real stuff.
Mhm.
That I mean, we've found like the smaller the group, the better because, you know, it's just fewer people to have to kind of mesh with. And
Mhm.
that safety is even greater the smaller the group is. So, like,
Mhm.
it's kind of like a magic number. Groups of six, like three couples, has been really,
Mhm.
really good.
Mm,
I love hearing that from you guys. And I
interesting.
love how you just nuanced that for some, they would want really deep. But for Wes and I, we found a lot of fun in groups that have some lightness and then some depths. And if he had found himself in this group of all psychoanalysts, that just isn't going to be the group that fits him. Whereas another couple, that's exactly it. So learn to negotiate with your spouse too. Who are you each? And know that you're going to make each other more interesting and more versatile if you stretch each other a bit too.
That's
Mm.
true. That's well said. And I think I'm just riffing here, but I
Mhm.
do think we've kind of seen this play out, whether it's in small groups or these types of things. I think I'm throwing this out there, but it seems there's a wiring for humans we need both things. And I think the best groups exhibit both things where there can be, because we've seen this so much of like where when you can be light, and it kind of can seem counterintuitive to some people that just want to always be deep, but it's
Mhm.
like when you can be light and not take yourself seriously, I think there's also a vulnerability that happens as well as like then when we go deep, there was sort of a hey, we can do both things because I think
Yes.
most of us are wired that we can go deep, but we
Mhm.
do need some of that lightness. We do need that, time to
Mhm.
just also be goofy if that's the right
Good.
fit there, but
Yes.
like and both
Mhm.
things can actually coexist. It doesn't have to be one or another. And I think the best
Yeah.
have both of those worlds,
Me
in my experience.
too.
Yeah.
Me too. I'm so
Uh,
grateful my husband brings me that because he's like, I already see medical patients all day dying, and
yeah.
I need to have
Yeah.
some balance. So it's nice to be able to do that. I love how you said, like, we all need to go for that too.
Yeah. So we bring this to a close. The Spanish writer Paul Coelho has this beautiful line where it says, change, but start slowly. Direction is more important than speed.
Mm,
Um,
good.
where does direction and just getting our bearings to start working towards new understandings of boundaries or where is that? Because I think we're knowing that we're not going to get it all. We're not going to
Mm,
get it all right away. But how do
mhm.
we just start to like change direction in the right way?
Hmm. We have to honor the little bits and pieces of the work we did because it can feel so discouraging when, like you said, we've done pretty well and we climbed up the mountain a little bit. Now we've fallen down and it's hurtful, especially when you read old journal entries and you find yourself in the same old space, like the old Caedmon's Call song said. And we're throwing in an old Christian song
Let's
reference.
go, 90s. Come on. Our God is an awesome God.
And so anyway, I think that it's important that we allow ourselves to just be human in that too, that there's the great reminder of the 1% better that people have been reminded of lately, that just don't dishonor the work you did and just little by little notice tiny changes. And that will require you to narrate differently internally. I had a
Mm.
couple with that this week, and they were really amazing. But one thing they had forgotten over the week between our sessions was that the work they did was incredibly rich and meaningful. And they were just so quick to discount it. And I wanted to bear witness to this incredible moment. And I said, even if it wasn't all of it, let's at least honor that huge piece, which was maybe only 1%. And I was reminded how Jesus goes after the one, not the 99. So just keep digging if there's something to be dug for. Like we said, don't dig too hard, have fun too. But in between your emotional root canals, make sure you keep bringing some lightness in so that you can keep going on the journey with refreshment, with wellness, but also a little bit of, noticing that bit of a struggle point. Like we do need to do our personal work too. Our egos have to bend a little bit so that we can grow towards God and towards each other.
Mm.
I love that. That's very helpful.
Yeah, fantastic stuff. So happy to have you join us today, and just all of your wisdom and so many great things to share. So we want anybody listening to be able to find you. Could you tell us how we can find your beautiful work?
Oh, thank you. You can find it at enneagramandmarriage.com, and that will be leading you to whatever you like, which might be my freebies, my newer book, my Instagram, YouTube, if you're a video person, just so many different pieces that I have tried to support you with that you can grow with, including the podcast where you can get to know a lot more about personality and or marriage techniques at large. So thank
Mm.
you. This has been beautiful. Your questions are so creative and full of depth, but also lightness and joy. So thanks, guys.
Oh,
It's
well,
been
we
really
love
fun.
you.
Thanks so much for being on today.
All right, bye-bye.
Yes, bye.
Thanks for listening to the podcast today. I hope you found something helpful, hopeful, or thought-provoking. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to any resources mentioned in the podcast. And we also have links in the notes for our own resources to check out. We would really love to hear from you. And we're also really grateful for your support by sharing the podcast episodes with your friends and family and leaving a rating and review. May we all regain and maintain our wonder, hope, and inspiration as we look at our ordinary through new and fresh eyes.